Welcome everyone to the final panel of the day. It's amazing to have all of you here. I realize the jet lag might be hitting some of you now, so bon courage, and we'll continue with the final panel. My name is Alexandra Cirone. I'm an assistant professor at Cornell, but this year I'm visiting Yale's Democratic Innovations program, and I'm very happy to moderate this final panel, Should Citizens' Assemblies Resemble Sovereign Parliaments? Now this panel, as you see, we've reconstructed ourselves into a fireside type of chat, but we are going to tackle some really interesting and perhaps potentially provocative set of topics, including the power of citizens' assemblies, the internal governance of citizens' assemblies, and the relationship of citizens' assemblies to traditional democratic elected bodies. And so we have an all-star lineup, which I will introduce now. So starting from my right, we have Thierry Beaudet, President of the French Economic, Social, and Environmental Council. We have Myriam, Souami, members of the Citizens' Convention on End-of-Life Issues, and also has considerable experience working for the French Parliament. Next to her is Cristina Lafont, who's a professor of philosophy at Northwestern. And last but not least, our gracious host, Hélène Landemore, professor of political science here at Yale, and also a distinguished researcher at Oxford's University Institute for Ethics in AI. Note, our format is actually going to be a bit different than the prior panel. So we are going to start with a series of opening remarks, again, 5 minutes in length. And then I'm going to collect answers to 3 separate questions. Then we will open up to general Q&A. And so the point of this panel is to expose a variety of sometimes contradictory viewpoints about the role of power in citizens' assemblies. Okay, so that being said, we're going to go ahead and start with our introductory remarks. So Thierry.
Bonjour, merci Hélène pour l'invitation. Alors moi je ne suis pas provocateur, donc je vais commencer par vous dire d'où je parle. Donc je préside le CESE, ça a été évoqué à plusieurs reprises. C'est la 3e assemblée constitutionnelle de France. C'est une assemblée indépendante du pouvoir. C'est une assemblée consultative. Une assemblée qui réunit les organisations de la société civile, 82 organisations qui ont 175 représentants issus du patronat, du syndicat, des associations, des ONG. Et la mission de notre conseil, c'est précisément de conseiller les pouvoirs publics sur les questions économiques, sociales et environnementales. Une assemblée consultative. Et il se trouve que depuis 2021, il y a une loi qui nous a réformés et qui nous invite à devenir le carrefour des consultations publiques, l'Assemblée de la participation citoyenne. Alors moi, je préside le CESE depuis 2 ans et demi. Et quand je me suis présenté à la présidence du CESE, c'était précisément pour mettre en œuvre la loi de 2021. Donc par rapport à la discussion qui s'ouvre, c'était mon programme, mon projet, et donc mon sujet à moi, c'est comment le CESE doit-il s'y prendre, comment doit-il s'organiser pour gouverner au mieux des assemblées de citoyens consultatives. Donc c'est vraiment la dimension sur laquelle je suis. Alors j'ai une conviction, j'ai la conviction que dans la situation politique de mon pays, la France, des assemblées de citoyens consultatives, c'est ce dont nous avons besoin aujourd'hui. Quand on interroge mes concitoyens, on observe qu'ils expriment une défiance considérable à l'égard des politiques et de la démocratie. Quand ils parlent des politiques, ils utilisent des termes très très durs comme mépris, désintérêt, les politiques ne tiennent pas compte de notre avis, etc. Et ça se traduit par une très forte abstention. Les Français sont de moins en moins nombreux à se déplacer pour aller voter les dimanches d'élection. Et puis, défiance vis-à-vis de la démocratie, parce qu'au bout du bout, de plus en plus de Français se disent finalement la démocratie, c'est une belle idée, mais qui ne fonctionne pas. Pour reprendre les termes de Marcel Gauchet, en France, il dit « À quoi bon la démocratie si c'est pour ne rien pouvoir au travers d'elle ?» Et on observe que dans mon pays, quand on interroge les Françaises et les Français, ils sont de plus en plus nombreux à considérer que si la démocratie, c'était une belle idée qui ne fonctionne pas, alors pourquoi ne pas essayer autre chose? Et il y a de plus en plus de Français qui seraient prêts à des régimes plus autoritaires. Donc moi, dans ce contexte-là, je pense que l'enjeu premier dans mon pays, enfin c'est l'enjeu que je me suis fixé, c'est de faire en sorte de réenchanter la démocratie. Et j'observe que si les Français sont nombreux à ne pas aller voter, ils sont par contre très nombreux à vouloir être acteurs des sujets qui les concernent. Et donc l'idée que nous avons au CESE, c'est d'essayer d'imaginer, d'imposer ce que j'appelle un nouveau continuum démocratique ou un nouveau chaînage démocratique qui font que la participation des citoyens à travers des assemblées citoyennes consultatives va aider à la construction de politiques publiques qui seront mieux comprises et mieux acceptées. Et pour ne pas être long et pour finir, moi j'aime ce propos introductif, j'aime à définir le CESE comme l'assemblée du premier mot. Et quand je dis que le CESE est l'assemblée du premier mot, ça signifie que le dernier mot appartient à celles et ceux qui ont la légitimité de l'élection. Mais je suis de plus en plus convaincu que la qualité du dernier mot, elle dépend beaucoup de la qualité des premiers mots. Et c'est là où les citoyens, à travers les assemblées consultatives, peuvent aider à ces constructions de politiques publiques. Et je pense que ça participe de la refondation de la démocratie. Moi, au fond, je suis convaincu que ce n'est pas tant la conviction démocratique qui s'étiole que les instruments de la démocratie qui ne sont plus adaptés aux objets, aux sujets auxquels notre démocratie doit faire face en 2024.
Parfait. Thank you very much. Next, I'd like Cristina to respond with her introductory.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Is it on? I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Hélène. She has heard that a lot, but I have to because this has been such a pleasure. I have learned so much, and this is just amazing to be here. Okay, it's much harder to just try to give a sense of what I wanted to say in 5 minutes, but I'm going to try. So the question that we were asked was whether we think that in terms of power for the future, these type of citizens' assemblies ought to be, as they are now, really merely consultative, but also in the sense that they are one-off, they are not necessarily permanent, as they are in other places, or whether we should be thinking more ambitiously that they should have more power and be even having powers such as legislative power, like a parliament. Okay. So in terms of that, the problem I have thinking in those terms is a continuum of power. So here you have very little power, and here you have a lot of power. I can see downsides on both, so I don't like the whole continuum. There are a lot of downsides on the way they are now. If you are just a consultative body, not so much because it's only consultative, but also because, as we know, the way they are organized, the fact that citizens don't know anything about it, makes it very easy for those who organize them to just get reports and never do anything. And that is, of course, frustrating. Like, why would you invest so much money and so much effort, right? Those who participate get frustrated because there is no uptake. So, and the idea is that if this is going to be significant, if that institution has a really strong role to play, it better make some impact. But you cannot make a lot of impact if you don't have power, right? So that drives towards thinking the more we see the exciting aspects of those potential institutions, the more we think they should have more power. Certainly today we have talked a lot about internal power, and we will talk about that later maybe in the questions. But also the question is, you want really whatever it is that at the end of the process is the recommendations or whatever to be possibly implemented. Okay. However, if you go very, very strongly with the model of citizens' assemblies or any kind of mini-public towards giving them legislative power, then you start having problems in terms of the fact that they are not being elected, they are not accountable to people outside. What happens, as it is likely to happen in many cases, as we know from some experiences, when what Claire mentioned before, the learning curve is so different between those who have participated and the rest of the public. The rest of the public has not been informed, has not had a chance to deliberate, etc. So you can't foresee in the future, if you had that type of institution in that way, working in that way, that there will be many mismatches between the decisions that are taken based on information and deliberation and what the public thinks. either the majority of the people or very mobilized people, right? People who care a lot about an issue that will bring up the question of the legitimacy. Who are they? Why are they speaking in my name? We want to decide those things. We are the people, right? So you can see already that type of problem. But then if you say, well, then don't give them power, then it's kind of like, well, then if you're not going to give them power, don't organize them, right? Okay, so you're moved towards the other side of the spectrum. I think that what we need to do is ask a different question. And that's what I'm going to try to propose in 1 minute probably that I have left, which is, we shouldn't be asking how much power in a continuum from very little power to a lot of power. We should be asking who do we want to empower and not how much power are we giving. And if you think in terms of that, I think that there is a tendency to forget why it was that we thought that these institutions were interested in the first place. The idea has always been that citizens are empowered, that the citizenry gets a say, that it has more capacity to influence the political process. It has always been about the citizenry, right? Then why do we want to empower, why do we want to use citizens' assemblies to empower a few randomly selected individuals? Do we really want, like, why? Why would you do that? It's like, who are they? Why do we want, I don't know, 20 people randomly every year making some decision or another? It's like, is that what has a kind of democratic potential? I think if we answer the other way around and say, no, we want to empower citizens in the real sense that they feel that they don't have the capacity to set an agenda when they have priorities that are not being taken up in the political process. We want citizens to have a say, to have a better say, and to influence the political process. Then we can think of citizens' assemblies not as being used to empower their few participants, but to be used to empower the citizenry. They could be a tool for us citizens. They could be mediating institutions that create a channel for citizens to actually, on a regular basis, especially if they were permanent, right, to actually get, for example, their initiatives on the table. And there are many ways in which, as you know much better than me about how to do things, that this could be done. But it will be extraordinary for citizens that feel so disengaged if they knew that there is an institutional challenge that will allow them, if they get minimally organized with very low level of signatures, to actually organize a citizen assembly that will help them revise and get experts and information on the initiatives that the citizenry cares about, right? If they knew that, they'll be much more engaged. They are now not engaged because they are not part of the process, they have nothing to do. And if you don't have anything to do, then you go back to the things you wanted to do in your life. But if you see that there is a channel, you can see how civic society organizations, social movements could use this capacity of initiative, of initiating, say, citizens' assemblies. And then again, they should have some power, but because that's why we need them as institutions. But we could also think, and to me, that's the Irish model has this beauty, right? That once you get citizens engaged and you have the citizen assembly as kind of the middle tool for the whole debate, etc., that citizens could have the right to ratify whatever initiatives then have been processed, etc., and discussed either in Parliament or the agencies that have jurisdiction over the issue, etc., right? You could have then citizens again ratifying that, for example, voting on referendum or not, etc. And that way you will be empowering citizens and not just a few randomly selected individuals. Okay, sorry.
Great, thank you, Cristina. Hélène.
Everyone, thank you for joining us. So I want to start with a word of thanks as well. President Thierry Beaudet, thank you for including me for appointing me to this governance committee, because it's been the experience of a lifetime, really. I was fascinating and transformative. And but I want to start with an anecdote that's not so positive. So on the first day, I think it was the Sunday of the first session, the convention members were visited by various officials. We had the Minister of Health. We had the President of the National Assembly, and she said a few things that to me were very problematic, and she questioned the legitimacy of the citizens in the Assembly. Basically, what happened is that one of the citizens asked her, how come we members of the Convention on End of Life have less power than the members of the Convention on Climate, because our opinion is purely consultative, because there will be a lot of filters down the road, and everybody's been telling us for 2 days that what we do is just, produce something that will enlighten the political decision, but not really shape it. And she seemed triggered by that implicit accusation of minoring the power of citizens. And she replied, well, it's out of the question that randomly selected citizens make decisions instead of elected officials. You're not representative, you don't have the legitimacy to decide. And what I want to say here is that I actually think this is wrong, and this is a narrow-minded way to look at the issue, which is based on the precedent of our representative governments. We can, in fact, envision a role for these citizens as representatives, democratic representatives of a new kind, not selected on the basis of elections, but on the basis of lot. And I believe that they can gain the legitimacy over time of not just giving a piece of advice, of not just even setting an agenda, but actually deciding and legislating. So that's the position that I would defend here. And I think there are very valid objections to the problem of accountability at the moment, especially given that we don't even know who really has power in these conventions. But I think if we think, very big and long term, in 200 years, we could perfectly envisage, self-ruling assemblies that are in some non-electoral ways accountable to the larger public, that speak for them in a way that's legitimate, and in my view is more accurate and more likely to produce good decisions than other sites of representative democracy. So that's the view I would defend, and I just want to end on saluting the historical precedent to this kind of vision, which is the Greek democratic precedent of the Council of 500 and the various juries that they had in place. If they could do it, I think we should be able to do it as well. So that's my position.
Thank you. Myriam.
First of all, I would like to thank Hélène and Théophile to giving me the chance to speak here at Yale University. This invitation to the conference allowed me to write a paper based on my experience both conventioneer and a former parliamentary and ministerial advisor. This will, I hope, offer a different perspective. Coming back to the subject of the roundtable, I understand why this question is asked, as our democracy is founded on the representation of people and the hegemony of elections. The power of legitimacy and the current legitimacy of citizens' convention derive from what representative democracy, or at least the executive power, agrees to grant them. That's why I understand the point of the French, the President French Assembly. Another source of legitimacy could be the quality of the work carried out. This question of representation is always at the heart of the debate in France and all around the world, and vis-à-vis the body public and citizens. This is why we need to work on the institutionalization citizen convention drawn by lot. For me, the main purpose of citizen convention is to enable the expression of democracy, direct democracy, with citizens trained this exercise, drawn by lot, capable of giving substance of the citizenship, and through their action and debate, by restoring to everyone the possibility of express themselves. Institutionalization will be not only provide the means to fulfill the ambition of citizen assembly, but also shed light on the debate outside the partisan logic of parliaments, thus ensuring a democratic continuum. the work, in fact, an exercise in citizenship that responds to the demand of citizens to participate in the life of city, not only during the election, but more regularly in major issues. It also responds to the desire of representatives not to be out of touch of citizens, particularly on difficult topics like the end of life. According to my experience, Citizens' Convention could constitute within the Economic, Social, Environmental Council a permanent citizen commission. The commission will be drawn by lots for 1 year or maybe less, and made up of around 100 citizens, and not only and not a member of Economic, Social, and Environmental Council. The purpose of the Citizen Convention would be to work on specific national issues, which would be defined with a prior referral as today. I think the link between sovereign parliament and citizen assembly lies on elected representatives rely in particular on polls and our feelings of a citizen. The citizen convention could be seen as a large-scale qualitative studies with a conventioneer trained in the democracy question, trained in the subject of interest, and expressing informed opinion on a wide range of subjects. Their opinion would be useful for the legislative work of members of parliament, who alone would be able to make technical proposals that could be amended in law. My opinion is that we need larger questions, like justice or meaning of punishment, with, for example, how our society dispenses justice and what horizon do we provide once the sentence has been passed. Conventions should present the global scope of ideas and opinion reflected in society and by experts. That's why I like this example with the Citizen Initiative Review in Oregon. An institutionalized citizen convention who could provide legislators with the keys that go beyond survey, feelings, and fantasy. It is this enlightenment by citizen for citizen that would enable members of parliament to make political choice. We would thus have conventioneers legitimized by their work, legitimized by elected representatives from political parties, who would themselves be responsible for making policy proposal, who would, and above all, legitimized in the eyes of citizens. In this sense, the Citizens' Convention would be integrated into the overall political work of representative democracy. So to answer directly to the question, citizen assembly should be more sovereign parliaments in their democratic functioning, maintaining their singularity which is not to make the law, but participate in increasing the sovereign expression of citizens and therefore democracy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for those great introductory remarks. Now we're going to go into the specific issues and challenges with citizens' assemblies. And first we're going to talk about how we situate any type of deliberative mini-public into the larger democratic project. And this is the big one. What is the relationship to a local or national government? Should they have governing power? Should they legislate instead of recommend? And I would actually suggest we keep the order that we just went in. And again, answers not 5 minutes, but feel free to expand on anything that you need to. So, yeah.
Oui, alors, président d'une institution, vous ne serez pas surpris si je vous dis que je suis attaché aux institutions. Et je suis notamment, dans mon pays, attaché à l'équilibre des pouvoirs, attaché au rôle du Parlement. Et je considère d'ailleurs que dans mon pays, le Parlement joue un rôle insuffisamment important. Moi, c'est pour, y compris pour la controverse, et pour aller dans un sens opposé, notamment à celui d'Hélène. Je considère que si la démocratie élective, si la démocratie représentative n'est pas toute la démocratie, je considère qu'elle est centrale et qu'elle est première. Et je considère que si demain, dans mon pays, mais pas que dans mon pays, dans le monde, il suffit de regarder ce qui se passe aujourd'hui. Si demain, la démocratie représentative s'affaiblit, c'est toutes nos démocraties qui s'affaibliront et nous serons prêts pour toutes les aventures autoritaires ou pour le développement de toutes les démocraties illibérales. Donc il y a un enjeu majeur pour moi sur le fait de conforter la démocratie représentative. Et je considère que si nous devions penser la démocratie participative en concurrence avec la démocratie représentative ou en substitution à la démocratie représentative, nous ferions courir des dangers incroyables à nos démocraties. C'est pourquoi je ne m'inscris pas du tout dans cette dimension. J'ajoute, je parle de mon pays, que si telle était la tentation, ça renforcerait le rejet du politique vis-à-vis de toutes ces démarches participatives. Parce que moi, je pense que la démocratie représentative ne s'en sortira pas seule et qu'aujourd'hui, au moins dans mon pays, la plupart du personnel politique est dans le déni, qu'il ne voit pas l'intérêt d'associer plus largement les citoyens, non pas pour le concurrencer, mais pour lui donner des points d'appui. La question, ce n'est pas l'alignement, c'est de donner des points d'appui à la démocratie représentative. Pour moi, le drame aujourd'hui de nos démocraties, c'est d'abord la crise d'efficacité. Je le disais tout à l'heure. À quoi bon la démocratie si elle ne permet pas d'assurer la promesse de progrès social, de sécurité, de justice sociale? Et aujourd'hui, nous sommes dans un pays où la plupart des politiques publiques, parce qu'elles sont conçues d'en haut, dans une temporalité, dans un langage étranger à celles et ceux à qui elles s'appliquent, finalement n'atteignent jamais leur cible. Et tout ça, ça entraîne un cercle de la défiance. Donc moi, je crois vraiment que les assemblées citoyennes consultatives, c'est un élément très important, très encourageant pour recréer de la confiance dans la démocratie et dans la démocratie représentative. Encore une fois, je ne la vois pas du tout en concurrence ou en substitution, mais en complémentarité. Je voudrais que nous mesurions qu'à l'échelle de l'histoire, la démocratie, c'est finalement un régime assez récent, qu'aujourd'hui, une majorité de la population dans le monde vit dans des régimes qui ne sont pas démocratiques, que c'est aujourd'hui dans les régimes non démocratiques que se concentre la richesse pour une large part et qu'on a un enjeu démocratique majeur. Moi, je pense qu'il ne faut pas jouer avec la démocratie représentative, mais qu'au contraire, notre responsabilité de citoyens engagés, de citoyens ordinaires, c'est de trouver les voies et moyens de conforter cette démocratie représentative.
I think that I mostly agree, absolutely, in the sense that I foresee this type of institutions as auxiliary, as supplementing, supporting representative democracy, and not as a replacement or a substitution. However, I think one can be a little bit more ambitious without undermining representative democracy, which is also how I feel. I mean, anything that will risk the kind of democracies that we have, however imperfect they are, for me will be unbearable as a possibility, because of course once you undermine something, you may get something much worse than what you got. However, I think we could be more ambitious in one regard, which is something that makes citizens very disentangled by this type of democracies that we got, has to do with the lack of responsiveness. And so there are things that gather a big majority of citizens, that a lot of citizens want to happen, but that they are intractable and never ever make it through the legislature for many different type of reasons. For this type of cases, I think that without undermining representative democracy, if you have the power of initiative, that will, with such a system, most likely only work for things that really have a majority support, that for some reason they are intractable. The legislature thinks it's not worth trying to do, is unable to compromise. For example, there are so many reasons why some things don't get done for this type of problem. For those cases, particularly, having the power of initiative and then the ability to ratify will make it possible to see progress in the direction that a peaceful majority of the citizenry wants, and is not happening. And I don't think that this will undermine. So it's a little bit more ambitious, but with the same model of actually helping ourselves with our institutions to get done what we wanted to be done anyway. So.
Getting into the controversial part, right? So I can't say I totally disagree with President Beaudet, actually, because as a citizen, as a concerned citizen, I would not want to undermine the stability of our democracies that are already, very weak and fragile. At the same time, as a theorist, I think it's my duty, it's my job to question the foundations of our system and point out their flaws. And so I think there's got to be a way that we can be critical and constructive at the same time, and that we can really think hard about radical reforms without playing in the hands of populists and enemies of democracy. But I do resist, and that's where I think that's irreconcilable for me, is I do resist reducing the citizens' assemblies to participatory democracy. For me, this is pacifying language that's not measuring the potential. There are representative democracy, just not electoral representative democracy. That's what they could be, at least. Not all of them, not in every country, not in every format. Currently, they are not that great because they are way too small anyway to be, to have the claim to representativeness that would, be the foundation of their legitimacy in part. So there's a lot of things that should change, but I think we have to find a way to resist this way of reconciling everything, because what happens is that if you look at the impact of this current approach is that it's quasi-null. The citizens' assemblies in France have had very little impact. We're still waiting for the end of life convention to have any measurable impact. Even Ireland is always celebrated. I used to celebrate Ireland as a great example, but yes, they've made progress on abortion and marriage equality, but it was already on the program of some political, parties who just found a way to make it happen. The system picked and chose among the recommendations that were put forward. So it's not just that there was this recommendation on abortion and gay marriage. There were 58 hundreds of recommendations that were completely ignored. So as long as we stay in this reformist mode, I just predict that nothing will change, and that participation washing is all we'll get. So.
For me, it's important to draw a bridge between democratic representative and democratic participation. Once again, what is the purpose of the Citizen Convention? To shed light on the subject through the opinions of citizens who became experts in the space of few weeks, I don't know, or to enable to express of democratic direct with the citizen trained in this exercise drawn by lots, capable of giving substance of their citizenships. It's just, for me, of course, by institutionalizing this convention, we could put some order into the whole process. For me, it's just like that we can respond to this question.
Great, thank you. And obviously, I think this issue will come up again in the Q&A, but we're going to quickly move on to another important issue facing citizen assemblies, which is about internal organization, which we've seen kind of echoed throughout many of the panels. And so this next question is, who governs? the citizens' assemblies, right? So should they be technocratically ruled by appointed experts? What are the role of governance committees and who should be on these governance committees? Or can we go all the way to completely citizen-run mini-publics? What are the trade-offs and who should govern these citizens' assemblies? Thierry.
Moi, je pense que dans le raisonnement qui est le mien, encore une fois, je rappelle d'où je parle, depuis le Conseil économique, social et environnemental, la question que je me pose, c'est comment réunir les meilleures conditions pour que la participation citoyenne infléchisse la décision publique. Parce que si la participation citoyenne n'a pas d'impact sur la décision publique, alors elle sera déceptive, le terme n'est d'ailleurs pas suffisamment fort, et ça accroîtra la défiance que j'évoquais tout à l'heure. Et moi, je pense que dans mon pays, compte tenu de l'histoire politique de mon pays et de la manière dont nous fonctionnons, je crois qu'une institution comme le CESE permet d'arrimer, d'attacher la participation citoyenne à la République. Et ça, c'est très important. Et je pense que nous pouvons, ça a été évoqué ce matin lors d'un certain nombre de tables rondes, nous pouvons, je crois, parce que nous sommes une institution indépendante, créer les conditions pour que, des points de vue des citoyens, nous apparaissions comme un tiers de confiance. Un tiers de confiance qui va essayer de déployer des méthodologies et une gouvernance dont les maîtres mots vont être la recherche de l'équilibre, de l'impartialité, de la transparence. Je dis bien la recherche parce que ce n'est jamais acquis, c'est totalement instable et c'est en permanence, naturellement, en construction. Le tiers de confiance parce que nous allons aussi créer les conditions qui font qu'au début, le contrat sera clair. La clarté du contrat proposé aux citoyens. Ce matin, lorsqu'a été évoquée la Convention citoyenne climat, avait été évoqué un propos du président Macron qui avait dit « Je reprendrai vos propositions sans filtre ». Ce contrat était mal posé, il était intenable et d'ailleurs, il n'a pas été tenu. Peut-être sur la Convention citoyenne fin de vie, avons-nous eu moins d'ambition, mais le contrat qui a été passé avec les citoyens, je pense que nous sommes en capacité de le tenir. Je suis convaincu que dans les jours à venir, c'est l'actualité française, un projet de loi sur la fin de vie va être déposé et il reprendra globalement les axes qui ont été proposés par les citoyens. Les propositions des citoyens n'auront pas été reprises sans filtre, mais elles auront été reprises. Et je crois à ça. Et encore une fois, je crois que dans le contexte politique dans lequel nous sommes, le CESE, parce que c'est une assemblée consultative par essence, parce qu'il est indépendant, mais parce qu'il est au cœur même de la République, je réutilise cette expression à dessein, peut arrimer la participation citoyenne à notre République et peut faire en sorte que la participation citoyenne infléchisse la décision publique. Et c'est bien ça pour moi qui est essentiel.
Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree. And at the general level, what I will say is, in my view, this type of institution, those who participate in it will be seen, if they really have this mediating role, as kind of civil servants. So it all works on trust. Citizens have to be able to trust that those randomly selected citizens are really playing the role of citizens, and this is a big trust. The citizens participating need to be able to trust all those who are organizing, who are providing the support, who are bringing the experts, right? Because if they don't trust them, right, then that again goes towards citizens not trusting the process either, Okay, if it is all going to be trust, I don't have an answer that says, yes, everything has to be done with the citizens. We saw this morning how, there are trade-offs here, right? So I don't think you can have a one-size-fits-all answer. However, I think if we realize that trust is the name of the game, because it is not a political process in the adversarial sense that you may find in Parliament, okay? If it is really trust, then you have to have transparency, and then you have to have co-responsibility, because I think the co-responsibility of those citizens who participate is towards the citizens outside. So it's not only so that they trust because they have been in the process and see that the process really is trustful, right? Is what it seems, and there are no other forces happening behind, but also because they have to take some accountability, even in the role that I think is ideal for them, which it won't be legislating, still they have to be co-responsible for whatever mistakes are made, for whatever doesn't work that way, right? So if there is that type of co-responsibility and transparency wherever is much more useful than having citizens participating in something that maybe they have no knowledge about or is not necessary. So I'm not sure about that they have to be in all committees and that they have to do everything themselves, right? But they have to feel that they have a clear sense of how it's going, so that there is enough transparency and no reasons to complain. That, I think, should be a kind of guiding principle.
I'll be short because I already defended my answer to this question this morning, but I do think the citizens' assemblies, to the extent that we see them as representatives of a new kind, should be self-governed. I think it's possible. I think it's difficult, but it's possible. It doesn't mean experts and all kinds of support shouldn't be available. On the contrary. But I think they should be able to say, we did this. And I don't think they can say, we did this, until they're in control of the levers of the process. So that's my view.
Yes, everything said this morning around organization, governance, tension between the steering and the governance committee is well known. That's why for me, the most important fact is citizen convention have to be democratic themselves. So I think it's up to a bureau, elected or drawn by lot, from among the member of convention to take decision on in organization, debate, audition, oversight. There are a risk of infantilizing the citizen assembly, which is convened by experts according to an agenda defined by this same experts. However, that doesn't mean the citizen convention should be them self-managed. Au contraire, we should integrate them much more in actual institutions to benefit from their administration, management, etc. Just like in actual parliament with administrator or things like that, under the bureau responsibility.
Great, thank you. Okay, and our final question, and this is going to be optional, so you can respond if you'd like to. If you don't want to respond, we'll move on to the open Q&A. But the last question has to do with who should set the agenda, right? So should it be, in these citizens' assemblies, citizens as a way to put important political issues that are maybe being ignored by the political elite on the political stage? Or should it originate from the government or other actors to get important citizen input on things that are already being discussed? And I realize that the easy answer to this is both, or it depends. Maybe we should do it all the ways. But given your experiences with these citizens' assemblies, is there a particular way you would recommend, or have you seen one of these ways been utilized in a way that you would like to highlight here?
Dans la situation française, le gouvernement, le président de la République, le Premier ministre, peut demander au CESE de réunir une convention citoyenne sur un sujet qu'il a défini. C'est ce qui s'est passé sur le cas du climat et de la fin de vie. De manière théorique, le Parlement, l'Assemblée nationale, le Sénat, peut saisir le CESE d'un sujet qu'il définirait. Les membres du CESE peuvent s'auto-saisir d'un sujet de convention citoyenne. Et puis, par ailleurs, le CESE peut être saisi par les citoyens français par voie de pétition. Donc là aussi, de manière théorique, les citoyens peuvent proposer un sujet de convention citoyenne. Donc j'allais dire, l'ensemble des cas de figure est possible. Moi, je pense que notamment les sites de pétition que nous observons montrent les sujets que les citoyens veulent voir portés. Et je crois que c'est la direction dans laquelle il faudra aller. Alors pardon d'être encore un peu raisonnable ou de manquer d'ambition, mais je vais apporter une toute petite réserve au moment où je parle. Si on refait le même colloque dans 2 ans, 3 ans, 5 ans, je pense j'espère que je pourrai dire des choses différentes, mais au moment où je parle, je reviens sur ce que j'ai dit. Moi, ce qui m'obsède, c'est comment la participation citoyenne va influer sur la décision publique. Eh bien, j'observe que dans mon pays, aujourd'hui, y compris quand la commande, elle vient de l'exécutif, du président de la République ou du Premier ministre, et en dépit de tous les efforts que nous faisons, ce n'est pas une garantie que nous influerons effectivement sur la décision publique. Parce que si je prends encore une fois l'exemple de la France, Emmanuel Macron, c'est le président de la République qui a fait le plus appel à la participation citoyenne, mais on observe tous qu'il peine à en tenir compte. Et on observe la tentation qui est la sienne parfois, finalement, de solliciter la participation citoyenne pour un pur exercice de communication ou éventuellement pour justifier des choix qu'il avait déjà mis en œuvre. Vous avez vu combien tout cela correspond parfaitement à ce que je disais. La politique que je menais était la bonne et il faut l'amplifier. Donc on voit bien tous ces risques de manipulation. Donc nous, aujourd'hui, nous nous battons pour que, au moins quand il y a une commande de l'exécutif tienne les engagements qu'il a pris devant les citoyens. Donc ma seule réserve, c'était que dans l'absolu, je pense qu'un thème de convention citoyenne identifié par les citoyens aurait beaucoup de sens et beaucoup de force. Je pense que dans mon pays, au moment où je vous parle, si tel était le cas, je crains qu'on renonce par avance à influer véritablement sur les politiques publiques, parce que même quand la commande vient de l'exécutif, on n'est pas sûr de pouvoir aller au bout de la démarche. Et j'espère, encore une fois, que quand on aura pris un peu de maturité, j'espère pouvoir revenir dans quelques années ici et tenir un discours contraire.
That's the problem of a philosopher speaking after a politician. You have to be prudent. So what I was going to say was that certainly we should have the first easier case where the executive or the legislative decides on an issue, but then you still get input from citizens. So we should have that for sure. So I wouldn't speak against it, but I wanted to be more ambitious about being able to be also bottom-up. But now we are being asked to be prudent, so I think still, like, okay, what about trying and succeeding with cases brought by the legislature or the executive and seeing how they feel then committed and how they have to actually, the more expectations there are among citizens, the more countries are doing it, right? The more countries actually did, like Ireland had a referendum and then things were, some of them, not all, were actually done, right? I think that is a process where, you get into a spiral as a politician, then it becomes very dangerous to say, I will do it without filter, and then you do nothing. I mean, eventually it's going to be costly. So why don't we start there, but then never, ever give up the possibility, which I think is why I really care about this type of institution, of creating a real channel for citizens to be able to influence decision-making on things that are being crucial, neglected. There is a majority, at least those, right? Maybe not more. So I would not give up, but on prudential reasons, maybe it's better to first get them to commit, because of course, if you do the other thing and it explodes, they may never, ever touch it again, right, if the decision was too problematic or something. So I see that point too.
So very briefly, the temptation would be to say, oh, we can set the agenda through another citizens' assembly, but actually, I think it's not that hard to find a topic that's of interest to the larger public, so why don't you do a simple poll? I think we all know already what the French people are interested in. It's immigration, housing crisis, purchasing power. I mean, so the topic could come from anyone with some good faith, recognition of the problems that are in the population. Then the exact phrasing, who should be in charge? Well, I'm not sure the government always does such a great job, actually, because the first question to the climate was technical and not super clear. The second question, I remember the first version of that question was floated at the CESE, so I was there, I heard it, and really convoluted and opaque, and some people reacted to that, and so next version we saw was simpler. But it felt like the process of even phrasing the question was very haphazard and non-transparent and not very accountable. So we could also just go, and that would be my cheap transition to tomorrow morning, but how about AI technology to sample the whole country and get a sense of what would be a good question that makes sense to everyone. And what's good about putting it through a citizen lens is that I think the question would be simpler and more direct.
Just when you see the agenda of French Parliament is also ordered by the executive power. So in this case, I think I have just a quick criticize. Just the question, my personal opinion is the question put to the convention must be more large, because when you ask of conventional something like our question for end of life, it was really, I can find the word, but it's not easy to respond of this question, because yes, they have a lot of things we don't think about, and so we can just ask question, not to answer yes or no, but more large.
Great. And also generally, agenda setting is political everywhere, not just citizens' assembly. So this is a larger democratic issue. Okay, so now, great job being on time, panelists. I appreciate it very much. So we have a lot of time for questions. I will say that a fourth question, if we would have had time, would have talked about accountability, which you rightly brought up, right? How do we get citizens' assemblies, or how do we get politicians to respond to citizens' assemblies, so it's not just window dressing. So I encourage you, if you'd like to ask questions about that or anything else that is in your interest. For now, I'm going to take them one by one. I'm not going to collect until we start running out of time. And then it's up to you guys, panelists, if you would like to answer, just kind of indicate. All right, questions. Okay, Matthew.
So I guess building off the accountability issue, after citizens' assemblies make their decision on what they want to do, what do you think is the best way to decide whether that actually gets done and how much of it gets done? Should it just be done 100%, no other conditions? Should it be put to a national referendum? Should it go to the parliament, to the executive, or any other option?
Great question. Panelists? Who wants to start?
I'll start just because that way it's going to be clear how hard that question is. I don't think one could give just one answer, but I can say what concerns I will have with potential answers that we know of. The problem with referenda, as we know, is that you need to know that there is a strong connection between what happens in the Citizens' Assembly and the public debate. And that is not always warranted. So if the issue is huge, if it's a constitutional amendment on abortion or same-sex marriage, like in Ireland, then chances are that the public will be paying attention, but you may have other issues where people are not. And so then the problem with referenda is that if it's unconnected to the Citizens' Assembly, then you have the problem you always have with referenda, which is that are people informed? Do they know what they are deciding? Do they know what their fellow citizens think, right? So that's why I do like the idea of having ratification powers, but it is dangerous and it's not necessarily a good idea for all kinds of cases. But that's one way. The other is, well, if you have the parliament being bound to actually legislate on the recommendation, then still you run into the problem of why I think that these two models of democracy or representation are likely to clash. Because what you have in the political model with elections and parties, etc., is that you need to be able to do compromises, you need to be able to give and take, you need to be able to work coalitions, right? And then here comes something that citizens randomly decided that ought to happen. How do you bring that into a parliament that works very differently? And I don't think always for the bad reasons. I think that they get things done that need to be done that way. Not everything can be done in one by one, right? You need to have a political agenda as a whole, and it has to be feasible as such, right? So if you are lowering taxes, and then here come the citizens saying that they want to have the most expensive services for healthcare, and they just have to do it, where is the money? I mean, they are responsible. So then that will say, well, no, it should be kind of like a recommendation that at least get discussed. But that opens the possibility that it just gets discussed, period, and it never happens. So that's how unhelpful I am as a thinker about how to do this. I hope someone else may have better answers.
I had a better answer. I think that the referendum is a first step, I think, toward accountability. I think we can't just hand over decisive legislative power right away. Obviously, that's not on the immediate agenda. So they need, I feel like the citizens' assemblies need to build their legitimacy, prove that they over and over produce good decisions that the public could get behind, that the system could get behind. And I think a referendum would be a good test. And in fact, it was such a missed opportunity with the climate convention, such a missed opportunity, in my view. I might be wrong, but it turns out that the citizens were scared of sending their proposals to the public because they read online, you know, that the social media reaction to the proposals, and you had two versions of it, which was, oh, those ayatollahs, green ayatollahs, they want to punish us, and then you had people on the left saying it's not radical enough, etc. So they felt like they were not going to be heard. When in fact, and it's something that researchers knew because we had run a poll at the time, but we hadn't made the results available. In fact, it turns out like on 14 of the structuring proposals that came out of the Convention on Climate, including the really more coercive ones, I thought, that should not be accepted, a vast majority of the population said they would have embraced them in a referendum. So actually, it was not that high of a risk to go to a referendum. It's just that they were not encouraged by the governance. I think that's where I think the governance of that first convention had an enormous power. The way they shaped the option of the referendum was like, well, it can only be done this way, the way we've always done it in France, which is one question, because constitutionally you can only do one question at a time. And I think we should have done the Irish model of multiple choice referendum. So it separates the issue of answering this referendum from the issue of whether you're for Macron or against. Because otherwise, in France, we have a plebiscitary tradition of referenda that's really bad. So anyway, it would have been possible to play around the constitutional rules by organizing multiple referenda the same day to have the multiple questions. That was never discussed. And that, to me, I blame that straightforwardly on the governance committee of that first convention. In our case, I remember we had fascinating conversations on the governance committee because, well, I, for one, was pushing for a referendum on end of life, and then the lawyers on our governance committee said, but Hélène, it's not possible because constitutionally we cannot have a referenda on societal issues, as they're called, meaning things like abortion, death penalty, things like that. So anyway, it was taken away from us anyway. But I think as long as we don't have an experience with referendum that reconciles the public with the practice of referendums in France, I just don't, it's going to be very difficult to create this accountability and this connection. So France is not looking like too promising in terms of going further with that aspect of citizens' assembly, unfortunately. So we'll see.
Une interrogation sur le référendum. Je partage ce que disait Hélène tout à l'heure quand elle disait finalement les sujets qui intéressent les Français, on les connaît. Je crois que tu parlais d'immigration, de logement, de pouvoir d'achat. Moi, c'est la raison pour laquelle j'avais proposé au président de la République une convention citoyenne sur l'immigration. Et finalement, ce n'est pas le choix qui a été fait. Et dans mon pays, c'est un sujet sur lequel on légifère tous les 18 mois. Ce qui donne d'ailleurs le sentiment d'une incapacité totale à maîtriser le sujet. On doit être au 27e texte de loi en 30 ans et mes concitoyens attendent le 28e texte à la faveur, par exemple, d'un fait divers. Enfin, tout ça n'est pas sérieux. Et un mot sur le référendum, parce que ces dernières semaines, alors qu'il n'y a pas eu de convention citoyenne, certains dans notre pays ont poussé l'idée d'un référendum sur l'immigration. Moi, au nom de la société civile organisée, je m'y suis opposé de toutes mes forces. Parce que, considérant qu'un référendum n'a de sens que si on est capable de réunir les conditions d'un débat référendaire éclairé. Et comme ça n'aurait pas été le cas, à travers un référendum, on aurait permis que toutes les certitudes féroces s'expriment sans avoir pris le temps de s'appuyer sur des faits. Mais mon interrogation, si l'immigration avait fait l'objet d'une convention citoyenne, est-ce que ça aurait changé la donne pour aller vers un référendum ? Pour moi, c'est une grande interrogation, parce que je pense que 185 citoyens tirés au sort reflètent-ils la diversité de la société française ? Ce ne sont que 185 citoyens, et ce ne sont que 185 citoyens qui font un parcours que ne fait pas l'ensemble de la société française. Et ça, c'est une de mes grandes interrogations pour aller d'une convention citoyenne vers un référendum. Quelles sont les voies, les moyens qu'on imagine pour que finalement, quand la convention citoyenne débat au nom de la société, que la société en même temps débatte de ce qui se passe dans la convention citoyenne. Ça me paraît une condition à réunir pour qu'éventuellement, après, on puisse envisager d'aller vers un référendum, encore une fois, pour que la convention citoyenne ait créé les conditions de ce débat éclairé.
Just would to add if we can just take this example in Oregon, and I think we can just send our recommendation and to the subject for or against it in the voters, and they can just try if they want to go to the referendum or not. Just take this recommendation. I think it's better.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm actually going to call on Claudia, who's very energetically waving in the back. Claudia, go ahead.
Hanging out at the back here, so I had to be seen. So I guess that my question is, like, why can't we think about handing over legislative power right away? Hélène, you were just saying, like, we need to kind of prove over and over again that it could take good decisions, but actually we have a lot of proof over hundreds of examples that when you do create these conditions, people come to really good decisions, and that the problem tends to be when those recommendations come back into the context of the political system that has all the kind of problems and disadvantages that have to do with the short-termism of elections and political parties and their oligarchic nature and so on. And why can't we be more ambitious in arguing for the fact that perhaps we should try by having empowered citizens' assemblies? And there's some polling which actually is showing that people also would want that and trust that. So there was a recent Cevipof poll in France, the UK, Germany, and Italy, which showed that something around 2/3, if not a bit more than that, in all across the countries on average, would want recommendations from citizens' assemblies to be binding on government. And I think we need to have this much more ambitious and radical vision for what could be another democracy, because precisely to Thierry's point earlier on, you know, I'm a disillusioned, concerned citizen, but I also don't think that the only alternative to electoral democracy is autocracy. I think actually the bigger problem might be that if we don't have another hopeful vision of what democracy could be, that's actually where we're turning towards the authoritarian tendencies, and people are going towards fatalism and just, you know, disconnecting entirely. So, Yeah.
Okay, great. Excellent pushback, Claudia. Panelists, what do you think?
I can always count on Claudia to be more radical than me. It's brilliant. So I just say that I'm glad you think they take good decisions, but those decisions are so rarely implemented that we don't actually know if they work in practice. So there's that. We haven't solved a number of problems, including the size problem, the governance problem. So imagine if tomorrow we give them power, then the lobbyists arrive, they capture the governance committees, and we end up with an implementation of things that actually are worse than if we hadn't done it. So actually that's where my optimism ends. I think we still have some way to go before we can make that leap. So I think it would be nice to take some risks, it's true, but maybe not right away at the national level. I look forward to seeing what Belgium does. I look forward to seeing what Wallonie does. Apparently they're also moving toward institutionalization. So I think we need 10 more years at the very least of work, personally.
Okay, so I'm going to push in a different direction, but I completely agree with Hélène. But so, Claudia, you were saying that it has been proven again and again that they make very good decisions. So I want to know, what do you mean by good decisions? Because if good decisions means decisions that the majority of the citizenry supports, then it looks to me like you don't need many public or citizen assemblies. You can just actually do a referendum. And I'm sure there are many, as I was saying before, many cases like that, but many are not like that. So if they are good because they really are informed and have deliberated, and therefore those who haven't have a completely different view, then the problem is that those aren't, for me, there aren't good decisions if people cannot identify with them and take their own risk and think that they are being governed by things they can endorse, right? To me, that is what democracy is. So no matter how good the decisions may be, if people cannot endorse them as reasonable and they don't see why they have to obey them, then they aren't democratic. So that is a structural problem that I see now and 50 years from now and whenever. There's kind of, yeah.
Okay, great. We have lots of questions. We'll try Kevin, and then I promise I'll go to this part of the room.
Thanks so much. Hello. So my question is, in some ways, kind of like a pragmatic one regarding how can you build trust? How can you build more examples like the Irish, which can be, I think, fairly interpreted as fairly successful, even if not maximally so. So the question I have here is, like, what problems can citizens' assemblies solve for representatives? When I think about the development of political institutions and representative assemblies, for instance, representative assemblies solved problems for existing elites at the time. Kings wanted money to fight wars. They couldn't get it unilaterally, so they had to cede some power to create a representative assembly. That solved problems for them, but it created the affordance of this power that could then be democratized. Do you see some kind of path through the problems that are besetting the current kind of representative institutions where they can see, this solves a problem for me, let me deploy this, and then, in 20 years or something, people can exploit the legitimacy that they inadvertently create in order to then be exploited for other purposes? I wonder if you have thoughts on that.
Actually, can Thierry take this one?
Moi, pour aller dans le sens de l'intervenant, j'ai été très frappé en France par ce qui s'est passé à la suite de violences urbaines qui se sont déployées dans nos quartiers. Et j'ai fait une comparaison avec ce qui s'était passé avec ce que nous avons appelé la crise des Gilets jaunes. Lorsqu'il y a eu la crise des Gilets jaunes, pour tenter de sortir de la crise, le président de la République a inventé ce qu'il a appelé le grand débat national, où plus de 2 millions de Français ont participé à ce grand débat. Ça a donné lieu d'ailleurs à 200 000 contributions écrites, dont aujourd'hui chacun s'accorde à reconnaître qu'il n'a pas été fait grand-chose. C'est en pensant au grand débat que je disais tout à l'heure, le président de la République a cru pouvoir dire finalement tout ce que vous dites conforte l'analyse que j'avais faite. Mon programme est le bon programme, il faut l'amplifier. J'exagère à peine. Mais au moins, comme il s'agissait des Français du milieu rural, des Français plutôt insérés, on a voulu apporter une réponse en allant vers eux. Et lorsqu'il s'est agi de la jeunesse de nos quartiers, ces jeunes qu'on maintient à l'écart, là, personne n'a exprimé le besoin de les écouter. C'est-à-dire que tous les responsables politiques ont considéré qu'ils avaient des réponses à apporter. Pour les uns, il fallait des réponses plus répressives. Pour d'autres, au contraire, il fallait mettre plus d'enseignants, plus d'éducateurs, plus de travailleurs sociaux, plus de services publics. Mais ce que j'ai observé, c'est que selon les questions posées ou selon les populations qui sont concernées par les sujets qui émergent dans un pays, la réponse n'est pas la même. Et en effet, quand les questions touchent des populations qui sont fragilisées pour des raisons économiques, sociales, culturelles, ethniques, il n'y a pas d'empressement des élites à adresser ces questions et en les associant au sujet qui les concerne. Donc je partage cette observation-là et c'est un sujet qui me paraît très important.
Great, thank you. Christiane.
J'ai une question très précise au vu de ce que vous venez de dire, justement. Il me semble qu'il y a une délégation outre-mer au Conseil économique, social et environnemental. J'aimerais bien savoir, en fait, ce qui va... Est-ce que, d'ailleurs, ça va changer, depuis la réforme, la façon de travailler dans le sens de ce que vous dites, d'ailleurs, à l'instant, pour les populations, les politiques publiques d'outre-mer. Je rappelle qu'en 2018, il me semble, il y a eu une enquête qui a été faite par le ministère lui-même des Outre-mer qui faisait état d'une déception de 68% des ultramarins sur les politiques publiques concernant leur territoire, alors qu'ils participent aux assises d'outre-mer et tout ce que nous connaissons, et alors que nous avons cet instrument au CESE, donc de la délégation outre-mer. Donc j'aimerais bien savoir quelle vision vous avez en fait pour faire évoluer dans le sens de vos convictions, de ce que je comprends là, ou de ce que vous voyez aussi comme analyse de la société actuelle en France.
Donc là, je pense qu'on n'est plus tout à fait sur le champ de la participation citoyenne. Là, on est sur le champ du fonctionnement ordinaire du CESE, qui, je le rappelle, quand on dit l'Assemblée de la société civile, c'est l'Assemblée de citoyens engagés dans des organisations de la société civile. J'aime à le rappeler. Et en effet, parmi ces représentants des organisations de la société civile, il y a une particularité parce qu'il y a quelques représentants qui ne sont pas là parce qu'ils sont membres d'une organisation particulière, mais parce qu'ils viennent de nos territoires ultramarins. Et on a constitué ce qu'on appelle une délégation aux Outre-mer, et sa mission première, c'est de faire en sorte que dans tous les travaux du CESE, il soit vigilant pour qu'il y ait systématiquement, j'allais dire, un éclairage outre-mer sur les différentes politiques publiques sur lesquelles nous sommes amenés à travailler. Et puis par ailleurs, ils s'autosaisissent aussi de sujets pour traiter des sujets spécifiquement outre-mer. Je ne sais pas si j'ai été clair, sur tous les sujets transversaux, faire en sorte qu'il y ait une vision outre-mer sur tous les sujets que nous traitons, et à côté de cela, des sujets qui sont des sujets spécifiquement outre-mer. Par exemple, récemment, la question spécifique du pouvoir d'achat dans les outre-mer.
Thank you. Okay, I am now going to ask my citizens what they would like to do. We have two options. You can take one more round of questions and then answer those, or you can have time for ending remarks. What would you like to do, my citizens? Questions? On y va. Okay, 3 more questions, but we're going to collect them. Okay, so we're here. One.
My question is for Cristina. A couple times you mentioned that citizens' assemblies are undemocratic. And my question is, you said the selection because not everybody is, no? Did I not hear you correctly? Okay, because there are arguments that, because, for instance, in France, we've had 153 years ago and then 185, 3 years later, that they're not really representative of the population and perhaps they're perceived as undemocratic. And so if you didn't say that, then my question is no. Okay.
I could say things, but not that. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay, that one didn't count. That was a clarification, not a question. Miguel.
Thank you so much. One question that I have in particular is, if we're thinking about who should govern these assemblies, and in previous discussions we've talked about how within these assemblies there seems to be already some kind of differences in who takes over, who becomes a figure of authority. Is there any possibility of maintaining the similar justifications, the similar normative justifications for random selection that we have on the scale of a population, like a national population, within a convention? I ask this because within the Convention on the End of Life, random selection was used a lot to decide who should be reporting, who should be the spokesman for different groups, who should be the spokespeople that present the work that has been done at a subgroup level. And I'm wondering, is there a lack of normative justification for random selection on such a small scale? Because it seems to me that people are talking about like, oh, let's put randomly selected citizens on the governance committee of these conventions. And I'm wondering, why would we do that? Is it because random selection is just assumed to work at every scale? Or is there something else that's justifying this choice?
Don't answer yet. We're going to take 2 more questions. In the plaid shirt, sorry, right. Keep going, Pam, right in front of you. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for this. I guess one of my questions is, the big question I'm wondering about is, we're talking about citizens' conventions at a national scale, but a lot of politics is more local or more subsidiarity, where there might also be a lot more room for the people, like, to have people that know each other. For example, a small town, or maybe scale it up. New York City is much larger than that, but still, it's much smaller than the United States. Why are we, how is the discussion about the national level impact of national sovereignty of citizen conventions, or that debate, how does that scale down to more local communities?
Okay. And one more, Gaetan.
Yes, thank you. It was very, very interesting debate, and I think everyone agrees on one thing, that it would be good to give more power to a citizen assembly. So I was wondering, giving more power means also probably that we would agree on what makes a citizen assembly successful, right? And so I was wondering whether you had an idea on that, whether it means 50% of the recommendation, whether it means that maybe just 2, but 2 that have a big transformative effect, perhaps. So that would be my question. And then I had another one, which is, how can we imagine, because we talk about citizen assemblies as being complementary enhancement to representative democracy, but how can we also make sure that the strengths of the citizen assembly also influence the representative democracy to make it evolve as well, so that citizen assembly are improving, can representative democracy improve as well, with the help of what is good in a citizen assembly. I'm thinking, for example, of deliberation, because our parliaments are supposed to deliberate as well, and they don't really anymore. And I know that, for example, in the mixed system that we were described, the mixed committee, but also was also the case with the plenary of the conference, The Future of Europe, the fact that we mix the MPs and MEPs with the citizens also had an effect on the MEPs themselves, because they realized there was another way to do things possibly, and maybe it works as well. So how can we imagine ways also for citizen assembly to feed in and support also with innovation that would be brought in the representative system and not confined to citizen assemblies? Sorry, 2 questions, in fact.
Okay, great. So we have 3 questions: benefit of randomization, local versus national, how we can do things better on multiple dimensions. And so we're actually going to start in the reverse order, because Myriam had to go last all the time. So Myriam, if you'd like to answer any question, any of those questions, or any concluding remarks, and then we'll go in reverse order.
just for the last question, I think you can say that citizen conventions solve one problem for representative. They are large-scale studies and bring proposal to political parties lacking of vision. However, their recommendation should be not for and or against that. But the bridge between the both can be just improved, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes, so the question, Gaëtan's question about how can the electoral system learn from a different type of, practice and deliberation and representation. So that's where I think I need to concede to Thierry that a conciliationist approach is better, because you want to convince people to come and try in good faith without feeling threatened, without seeing these new assemblies as competition for their position. And I've been really so it's ambivalent, because on the one hand I've seen high-level bureaucrats come to the regional assemblies during the Great National Debate, actually, and be completely transformed overnight. Like this person who basically ran the thing told me, well, I was just being a good soldier, implementing this vision. I didn't believe it. But now that I've listened and watched and listened on these deliberations among randomly selected citizens, I'm sold. Now So it is transformative to observe them and see them and leave them. At the same time, normatively, I still think competition is good. I don't think we should be experimentalist about what works and what doesn't, and empowering a different part of the system or a newly created part of the system is also a wake-up call for the powers that be. They need to ask themselves, are we still useful? Are we even still legitimate? When you see the plummeting approval rates, I mean, there are causes for worry. It's not like they kind of brought this upon themselves too. So I think, I think that it's a mix between being ambitious normatively and it's strategically smart and trying to convert one person at a time. And I was also heartened by Colin's remark about how you see yourself as an insider, like a mole for this new form of deliberative democracy. And there are I think there are many people of goodwill who see the problem with their own position of power and are willing to concede some of it. But it's just not those we hear. We hear people like the president of the National Assembly, who's very haughty and on a high horse about this. And I wish the secret supporters spoke out more and and more of a visibility in the system. To Miguel's question, excellent question. I don't have the answer, but I'll just say that there are many reasons to embrace sortition at the large scale. It's in part for the descriptive properties of the sample you obtain. That's of great value if you want to track what people actually want and feel and what their interests are. And I think it does improve the quality of the deliberative result. At the very small scale, when you're picking one person or two, you don't get that, obviously. But you get a distribution of a good in a way that is impartial. And I think that's what the citizens respond to. And we had fantastic debates internally in plenaries in the Convention on End of Life about how should we distribute the role of speaking to President Macron at the end of the process, because there were only two positions. Who's going to get that honor? And that responsibility. Same thing for the address to the nation. Right? We chose 8, in the end it was 7, to speak to the nation on behalf of the rest of the group. Who should do that? And on the governance committee, we decided we can't decide that. So we're just going to let them decide. And then they asked immediately, we need to talk about this first. So they asked extra time to deliberate. And you had this back and forth between people who said, well, for someone to speak to Macron, they need to be on their level. So we need to choose the good students, the people who speak well. So we're going to have to do some kind of election, right, to identify the good people. And then somebody said back to that, no, Macron should come down to our level. And therefore, we should choose randomly. And in the end, they voted to identify the representatives that would speak to Macron on the basis of random selection. But they chose on the basis of election without candidates, liquid democracy, the representative that would speak to the nation, because they wanted to address their peers, their fellow citizens, through the medium of like the best students in the natural leaders of the convention or something. So I don't have the answer. I just think that it's very interesting.
Cristina?
Okay, I'm going to address then the local versus national question, because on the random selection I agree. On the other case I also agree. So on the local and the national, I see several things. Like something really good about having this type of processes at the local level is something that I think, and is I think implicit in a lot of what I have said, namely that for the whole thing to work, there has to be a way in which citizens themselves get to be more engaged in public debates on the issues. And so the beauty of the local issues is that you can multiply at a level that you cannot do with constitutional amendments. And so then if you have it locally everywhere, people will get familiar to it in the same way that people get familiar with the jury system, because they are called to the jury from time to time, or because they get that in the local news or whatever. So that is an extraordinary advantage. Sometimes, although it depends, but it can also have an advantage that sometimes local issues, because of jurisdiction, are not extraordinarily high stakes. They are not the hot button worst possible cases. That helps also, because what we are trying to do is to get this institution a chance under the best, easier, and less controversial conditions. So that speaks for the local in that sense, right? However, if your question, and I wasn't sure, was in the sense that when you go local, the problems we have been discussing in theory that were meant to be kind of national, because we were talking about legislative capacity and parliaments and whatever. With regard to all the difficulties of accountability, the extent to which it is democratic, the extent to which the people outside will feel that they are represented, I think the problems are exactly at any level. If you go to even like a school board and you do a kind of assembly of students, you still have all these problems. I don't think that they are any easier at the local than at the national. And in fact, if people are paying a lot of attention because it's very close to them, maybe even worse. So on that, I don't know.
Moi, je n'ai ni l'expérience ni le recul de beaucoup d'entre vous sur les questions que nous avons débattues aujourd'hui, mais néanmoins, j'ai déjà acquis une conviction, c'est que la démocratie participative a beaucoup à apprendre à la démocratie représentative, ou pour le dire autrement, la démocratie représentative a beaucoup à prendre de la démocratie participative. Moi, ce qui m'a beaucoup frappé lors de la convention citoyenne de la fin de vie, c'est que j'ai pu mesurer que quand on crée des conditions propices, on pouvait parler de façon apaisée de sujets qui divisent. J'ai découvert en observant les citoyens que par ces pratiques délibératives, sur un sujet sur lequel on pouvait arriver, par exemple, en n'ayant que des perplexités, des interrogations, on pouvait se forger un point de vue. On pouvait, le cas échéant, par la délibération, changer de point de vue. Ben moi, je peux vous dire que dans mon pays, ce n'est plus le cas dans la démocratie représentative. Dans l'arène politique, on ne se donne plus la possibilité de se forger un point de vue ou de changer de point de vue. Dans l'arène politique, on est là pour tenir des positions, ce qui est radicalement différemment. Alors je sais que dans une démocratie pluraliste, il y a de la conflictualité. La conflictualité est au cœur de la démocratie pluraliste. Pour autant, ça ne signifie pas que la démocratie n'est qu'un sport de combat, et on peut au moins chercher des terrains d'entente qui vont permettre de dégager des majorités, le cas échéant, et y compris de respecter des points de vue minoritaires. Moi, j'ai trouvé qu'en observant là d'où j'étais la convention citoyenne sur la fin de vie, alors je sais qu'il peut y avoir des appréciations différentes, mais au fond, il y avait une majorité, il y avait une minorité, mais il n'y avait pas de gagnants et des perdants. Il y avait des points de vue qui avaient été argumentés et qui avaient été respectés. Et je pense que la démocratie représentative ferait bien de s'en inspirer.
Okay, great, excellent. So this concludes the panel. So if everyone give a round of applause to our panelists. while I have your attention, the microphone, and Hélène on the stage in front of us, I would like everyone to recognize the great work that goes into bringing together all sorts of different people from different countries in a week-long conference. So we appreciate you, Hélène, for all the work you've done. Also Democratic Innovations, Pam, Antonine, Theo, Matthew, who did the website, everyone. So a huge round of applause for the team that brought us all together.